Curious people. Happy to have you with me again for another episode of Curious People Wanted, a video series by the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'm Adrienne Saint-Pierre, and as the museum's curator, I'm always learning new things about the artifacts and documents in our collection. And the best part is getting to share the stories. A few weeks ago, we received a magazine from a person who lives locally, and she has a deep interest in history. She was sorting through her bookshelves, and she came upon this magazine from 1986. It's called With New York Firefighters. She sent it to the museum because it contains an article about the fire that destroyed P.T. Barnum's American Museum in New York on July 13, 1865. Now, this article is interesting because it provides a different perspective from most of the retellings of this fire. It tells us more about the individual firefighters who responded to the fire that fateful summer day, as well as giving us some new context for that time in New York's firefighting history. I'm guessing you already know that this fire completely destroyed the 5-story marble building and all of its attractions. Luckily, all the humans escaped, but most of the animals were not so fortunate, even those who made it out of the building. And of course, the exhibits of artifacts were a total loss. The firefighters' encounters with the wild animals on the loose became the stuff of legends, tigers on the street. Well, receiving this magazine reminded me of a couple of items in the collection that relate to the American Museum fires. So here we have the New York Herald newspaper from July 14th, 1865. And they put the conflagration, as they called it, as the front page news. This entire page is about the fire, which it deserved to be. Barnum's Museum was a landmark and an extremely popular attraction. Here it is in New York in the 1840s. And that loss was very considerable. And yet Barnum managed to reopen in another location on Broadway only a few months later in October. So this article is an entire page of tiny, tiny type here, and loaded with details. I have no idea how they got this information so quickly, because it gives a list of all the losses. It wasn't just Barnum's museum, but many other buildings in the surrounding area. This is a picture from the 1840s, and of course this is now about 20 years later. There are more buildings, taller buildings. Barnum's museum was said to, his loss in stock was said to be $300,000, but it was only insured for $60,000. Now, he didn't own the building. The building belonged to the estate of Francis Olmsted, and that was valued at $40,000, interesting, and was not insured for quite that amount. So that information is there, a list of all the different engine companies and hose companies, all the firefighting companies that came to battle the blaze, which was considerable, and it was rightly called a conflagration. Well, something I didn't know about until I read this article was that this same time period marked a milestone in the city's history of firefighting, which up to that point was a volunteer force. New York's volunteer fire department, which included the Volleys, who responded to Barnum's fire, was about to disappear. On September 1st, only about 7 weeks after the museum burned, the volunteer firefighters were ordered to make way for a paid professional fire department, which was to be called the Metropolitan Fire District of New York. So on that first day of September in 1865, Chief Engineer of the Volleys, John Decker, and the 4,000 red shirts had to turn over their firehouses, engines, and tools and equipment to the pros who were replacing them. That was 583 Mets, as the paid professionals were called. Of course, among them were many former Volleys. It was a peaceful transition, but undoubtedly an emotional one for many of the volunteers who were well known for their bravery and self-sacrifice, and thus set the standard for the new department. Well, despite having a fire department of paid professionals, New York would continue to suffer from devastating fires. New buildings were usually taller than the old ones, and even if they were constructed with stone, the design of some of these buildings resulted in major fire hazards. Maybe some of you know that Barnum's second museum also burned. That happened in March of 1868, not even 3 years after the first fire. The causes were very different. The first was believed to have been arson, and the second was due to a malfunction in the heating system, the flue, which happened when the museum was closed at night, thankfully. Well, to that point, that is when it happened, we have another interesting item in our collection, and that is a portion of the fire department's logbook for 1868. So this contains a record of all the alarms that came in, and on this page here we see recorded in ink the time when the department received the call, actually 2 calls about the fire, 12:20 and 12:29. I don't know about you, but seeing this kind of thing gives me the chills because it's documenting that specific moment when a catastrophe occurred. As happened with the first museum, this fire also consumed the building, another total loss. And as it happened, this was one of a series of tragic losses the Barnums suffered in the space of only about a month or so. Let me show you what the building looked like after the fire. All the water turned to ice. Barnum's mother passed away only 11 days after the fire, and then his namesake grandson, a little boy not yet 3 years old, died in early April. These losses must have been terrible blows coming so close upon one another. So it was at this time Barnum decided to take the advice of his friend Horace Greeley, who suggested he take it as a sign that he ought to retire and go a fishing. Well, that retirement only lasted a couple of years, and then the restless and energetic P.T. Barnum embarked on the career that brought him even greater fame as the circus entrepreneur who created the greatest show on earth. That, of course, is another story. But I hope you found it interesting to learn these tidbits about New York's firefighting history and the American Museum fires, which ultimately led to a change of careers for P.T. Barnum. Thank you for joining me today. Stay curious, and I'll see you at our next episode of Curious People Wanted.